Well, this is interesting. What happens when we get hurt? Well, remember that not only animals can get injured. See, this poor little plant. See that big cut over there? We can receive or suffer small wounds. Well, not so small. That's a little bit bigger than a paper cut. This is definitely not a small one. Look at that. Cool. Look in here. We can see deep planes. This is muscle right there. Right above the muscle there is a small membrane. We call that fascia. Now this is fat. This is fatty tissue. And right before we get to the skin, there is like an area of transition between the fatty tissue and the skin. That's a subcutaneous tissue. So we have a lot of layers covering our internal structures. Anyways, well, in here, this is a big one, of course. Okay, let's see what else do we have over here. Oh, remember, I bet you have heard this from your mom. Stop scratching that! Right? Now, see what happens when you don't listen to your mom after you get one of those piercings. This is probably a destroyed nipple. Well, what it used to be. The infection is severe. You can see some areas over here. This is the central area, which is where most of the infection is happening. You also see some satellite areas that start to collect some pus. This is not pretty. All right. So let's put this over here somewhere. And also, look at this. Isn't it interesting that after so many injuries, we get to see, look at this area. See, you can hardly notice a little scar over there. There is another one over here. This is probably after some gardening or something. And there is a minor one over here. I don't know if you can see it. But we have a very effective system to deal with injury in our bodies. So living things, we are really prepared to respond to injury. So let's review and see what is all this about. Of course, this involves cell division, right? Because if you get hurt, right, probably like this. Let's move this away. See, we need to patch this up. See, we need to patch this up. Bring some scar tissue here. So some cells need to receive some orders. Okay, come on. We need you to divide. We need you to patch this up. We cannot afford this open wound because our barriers will be wide open to infection or other things. So there is a system in place for us, for the living things, to respond to injury. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Regarding to the cell cycle, the cell can be either dividing or not, right? So on this red chunk is when cell division happens. Cell division or mitosis. The rest, meaning from here up to here, that is going to be called interphase. So as you can see, most of the time the cell is not dividing. So during interphase the cell is not dividing, but that doesn't mean that the cell is just chilling. Initially they have a little chapter or phase that is called G1, means the first growth session. And there is another one that is called the S phase. S stands for synthesis. Guess synthesis of what? Yeah, DNA. Synthesis of DNA. And there is a second growth station, if you wish, that is called G2. So it's not just resting. See, it's very busy, growing and being prepared for division. During G1, the cell is growing. At the end of G1, we have a checkpoint. If the cell has been growing strong and healthy and is ready for the synthesis phase, the cell will proceed. So that's our first checkpoint. Remember, the S phase is for synthesis of DNA. During this phase, DNA is going to be copied, if you wish. But it's not only until the end, towards the end of G2, the second growth phase, that there's going to be a second checkpoint to do some quality inspection. All right? So if this checkpoint over here says that everything is going fine, you will proceed, the cell will proceed towards mitosis. So mitosis means that, okay, the cell is ready to divide. So you will go towards each of the phases of mitosis. And as a third checkpoint is going to be right between mitosis and cytokinesis over here. That's another checkpoint. So if at the end of mitosis this inspector says, okay, everything has been great, you did a good job, that means that the cell can pinch and separate into the two new cells and go to cytokinesis. So those are basically our three checkpoints during the cell cycle. Okay, each of these checkpoints, right, is basically quality inspection to determine if the cell is going to proceed to the next stage or if it is going just to stay there. So let's imagine we have an inspector here. If at this checkpoint the inspector sees that everything is going okay, that after the G1, the first growth phase, the cell is good size and growing perfectly, is going to send signals, which are just proteins, that are going to stimulate the cell to proceed to the S phase. And let's imagine that it arrives to this G2 checkpoint, and the inspector in here says, okay, wait a minute, I don't like how you are doing your work. This growth phase is not good enough. You're going to stay here. You are not going to proceed to cell division. So this inspector is going to send signals, some proteins, that are going to make the cell to stay in this particular phase, right? But if everything is going okay, the cell will proceed to mitosis and then divide it. Now, just imagine what would happen if the cell has crazy inspectors that keep stimulating the cell to go forward and divide and go forward and divide again. That sounds like what? That sounds like, yeah, cancer. So that's what cancer is. It's just an uncontrolled cell division. The cell keeps dividing and dividing and dividing, and nobody is being able to stop this craziness. So when these checkpoints are not doing what they are supposed to do and cannot control or stop as they normally are supposed to do, these cells are going to fall into what we call cancer. This craziness on these inspectors can be produced by mutations, and these mutations can be produced by specific toxins, right? It could be like UV radiation. It could be a chemical. We call all these factors mutagens because they can produce mutations. So this is let's see, this is how you spell mutagens. Mutagens. This means generation, and this means mutation. So a mutagen is just a factor that can produce a mutation that develops, in this case, cancer.